He heard crying in the storm for 3 nights straight, each wail cutting through the howling Himalayan winds. What began as a faint whimper soon became impossible to ignore, pulling him toward his weathered barn on that final, fateful night. When he finally mustered the courage to slide open those heavy wooden doors, a leopard was waiting inside. Not just a deadly predator, but a moment that would forever alter two souls caught in nature's cruel game. Marcus had spent 5 years in this remote cabin, capturing the world's most stunning wildlife images. But he never expected to become part of the story. The first night of the storm, he was editing photos when he heard it. A faint cry, barely audible above the violent winds battering his windows. It sounded almost human. "Just the wind playing tricks," he muttered, turning up his music to drown out both the storm and the unsettling sound. But the crying came again, more distinct this time, somewhere between a child's sob and an animal's pain. Marcus froze, his finger hovering over his keyboard. 20 years photographing predators had taught him to trust his instincts, and every nerve in his body was now screaming danger. He checked his doors twice that night, his shotgun leaning against his bed frame as he drifted in and out of restless sleep, the crying occasionally piercing his dreams. But what Marcus didn't know was that the crying would return, and with it, a presence that would change his life forever. The morning after brought no relief. The storm had intensified, trapping Marcus in his cabin as sheets of rain pounded against the windows with relentless fury. The electricity had flickered throughout the night, finally surrendering to the storm's wrath just before dawn. Now he sat in the gray morning light, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold, his mind replaying the strange cries that had haunted his dreams. During a brief lull in the downpour, he ventured outside, his boots sinking into mud as he scanned the perimeter of his property. The mountain air felt heavy, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the lightning. Nothing seemed disturbed, no tracks, no signs of intrusion. Just the aftermath of nature's fury. Broken branches scattered across the clearing, leaves plastered against every surface, and his satellite dish hanging precariously from its mount. "You're losing it, old man," he chuckled to himself, blaming isolation and the storm for his imagination running wild. 3 years since his last human visitor, 5 since he'd moved to this remote outpost. Perhaps loneliness was finally catching up with him. Marcus had chosen this life deliberately after decades of chasing the perfect shot for National Geographic and other prestigious publications. The solitude of the Himalayas offered both sanctuary and subject matter, allowing him to document rarely seen wildlife behavior while healing from wounds both physical and emotional. His ex-wife had called it running away. Perhaps she was right. He spent the day methodically checking his equipment, cleaning lenses that didn't need cleaning, organizing files that were already organized. Anything to keep his mind occupied. The satellite connection was down, cutting him off completely from the outside world. Not that he minded usually, but today the isolation felt oppressive, like the mountains themselves were closing in around his small cabin. As darkness fell on the second night, the crying returned, louder, clearer, impossible to dismiss. It was coming from the direction of his old barn, a structure he rarely used except to store equipment and the occasional supplies that couldn't fit in his cabin. The sound sent chills racing down his spine, raising goose flesh on his arms, despite the warmth of the fire he'd built in the hearth. Marcus paced his living room, debating whether to investigate. The rationale part of his brain warned against venturing out in the middle of a Himalayan storm to chase phantom sounds. Yet something in that cry tugged at him. A raw desperation he couldn't ignore, a plaintive quality that seemed to reach directly into his chest and squeeze. He'd photographed predators on 5 continents, had stared down charging elephants, and stalked alongside lions. Fear was an old companion, one he'd learned to acknowledge and then set aside. But this was different. An unnameable dread that settled in his stomach like a stone. The wind howled through the eaves of the cabin, an eerie counterpoint to the crying that seemed to rise and fall with the storm's intensity. Marcus found himself standing at his window, peering through the rain toward the dark silhouette of the barn. A flash of lightning illuminated the path between, and for a split second, Marcus thought he saw movement. A shadow darting across the yard, too quick and too large to be one of the usual forest creatures that sometimes sought shelter near his property. He grabbed his high-powered flashlight, sweeping its beam across the yard. But the darkness and rain swallowed the light, revealing nothing but glistening wet grass and the continuous sheets of water cascading from his roof. Sleep eluded him entirely that night. He sat in his chair, camera in one hand, shotgun in the other, watching the barn through his window as thunder shook the foundations of his cabin. Occasionally, he would raise his camera, its telephoto lens serving as a makeshift telescope. But the darkness yielded no secrets. By morning, his eyes were red-rimmed and burning, his nerves frayed like the edges of the old Nepali rug beneath his feet. The storm was reaching its peak, and so was Marcus's fear. But what waited for him was far more dangerous than anything he could imagine. A confrontation that would test everything he thought he knew about survival, compassion, and the thin line between man and beast in the unforgiving wilderness he called home. By the third day, the storm had become a living entity, a malevolent presence that seemed determined to test the limits of both Marcus's cabin and his sanity. The wind screamed through the mountain passes, carrying with it the promise of something ancient and untamed. The rain no longer fell but rather attacked, pummeling the earth with such ferocity that small mudslides had begun forming on the slopes around his property. Marcus had barely eaten, his appetite vanishing beneath the weight of exhaustion and apprehension. He'd spent the day preparing, checking and rechecking his shotgun, replacing the batteries in his most powerful flashlight, even laying out the first aid kit on his kitchen table, though he couldn't articulate why he felt it might be needed. As dusk approached, bringing with it that peculiar mountain darkness that seemed thicker than mere absence of light, Marcus felt a decision crystallizing within him. Tonight, he would confront whatever was in the barn. The not knowing had become more unbearable than any danger he might face. "This ends tonight," he whispered to himself, voice rough from disuse. He dressed methodically, thermal underwear beneath waterproof pants, 3 layers topped with his heaviest Gore-Tex jacket, sturdy boots laced tight. Around his neck, he hung his camera, an old habit, an extension of himself he couldn't leave behind, even now. The shotgun he loaded carefully, each shell sliding into place with a satisfying click that somehow steadied his trembling hands. When darkness fell completely, the crying began again. This time, there was something different about it, more urgent, more desperate. It rose above the storm with a clarity that made Marcus's heart race. No longer could he convince himself it was just the wind or his imagination. Something was suffering out there, something alive. At precisely 10:37 p.m., he noted the time automatically, the photojournalist in him documenting even now. Marcus stepped out into the storm. The rain hit him like physical blows, and the wind nearly knocked him sideways. He braced himself, flashlight beam cutting a weak path through the darkness, shotgun clutched tightly in his other hand. The 20 yards to the barn might as well have been 20 miles. Each step was a battle against mud that sucked at his boots and wind that seemed determined to push him back. Halfway there, he fell to one knee, cursing as cold mud soaked through his pants. The crying grew louder as he approached, punctuated now by another sound, a low, rumbling growl that vibrated in his chest, even from outside. Standing before the barn doors at last, Marcus hesitated. Years of wilderness experience screamed warnings in his head: predator, danger, retreat. But something else, something deeper and more instinctual, urged him forward. The same impulse that had once made him crawl within feet of a mother tiger to photograph her newborn cubs now pushed his hand toward the rusted metal handle of the barn door. The crying stopped, abruptly. The sudden silence was more terrifying than any sound. Marcus's flashlight beam trembled across the weathered wood of the door. Rain streamed down his face, blurring his vision. He blinked it away, took one deep breath, then another. With a decisive motion, he slid the heavy wooden door open just enough to slip inside, shotgun raised, flashlight beam sweeping the darkness. For one heartbeat, nothing moved in the musty interior. Then his light caught a pair of eyes, luminous, golden, reflecting the beam back at him with otherworldly intensity. They were set in the face of the most beautiful and terrifying creature Marcus had ever encountered. A leopard was waiting inside the barn. A snow leopard, the ghost of the Himalayas, one of the most elusive predators on Earth. It crouched in the far corner, muscles tensed beneath its spotted coat, tail lashing slowly back and forth. But it wasn't alone. Beneath the magnificent creature, partially sheltered by its body, were three tiny forms. Cubs, no more than a few weeks old, their eyes barely open, their spotted coats still fuzzy with infant fur. And Marcus understood at once. The crying, the desperation, the choice of his barn as shelter. This wasn't an attack waiting to happen. This was a mother, driven by the storm to find sanctuary for her babies, choosing human proximity over the fury of the elements. As man and beast stared at each other across the shadowy barn, Marcus felt something shift inside him. A recognition, a connection that transcended species. In that moment, he wasn't a photographer or even a man. He was simply another living being, face to face with the raw, untamed heart of the wilderness he had spent his life documenting. The leopard's growl vibrated through the air between them, neither threat nor welcome, merely acknowledgement. And Marcus knew his life had just changed forever. Dawn broke with surprising gentleness, the storm finally exhausting itself sometime during the night. Soft, golden light filtered through the cracks in the barn's weathered walls, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like miniature constellations. Marcus sat on an overturned feed bucket just inside the barn door, his body stiff from hours of minimal movement. His back ached in protest, and his eyes burned from the vigilant night watch he had maintained. The shotgun lay beside him, unloaded now, a concession he'd made around midnight, when it became clear the snow leopard had no intention of attacking. The magnificent cat watched him from her corner, golden eyes rarely blinking, her body curled protectively around her cubs. Her fur, a mesmerizing pattern of rosettes against a pale gray background that allowed her to vanish against snow and rock, seemed to absorb the morning light, giving her an almost ethereal quality. Throughout the night, the tiny creatures had nursed and slept, occasionally emitting those eerily human-like cries that had first drawn Marcus's attention. Their tiny paws, already equipped with the beginnings of what would become formidable claws, kneaded at their mother's belly as they fed. "What am I supposed to do with you?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. The question wasn't really directed at the leopard, but at himself, at the universe, at whatever twist of fate had brought this apex predator to his doorstep. He ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, feeling the grit of a sleepless night against his scalp. Snow leopards were nearly mythical creatures, so rarely seen that some local villagers considered glimpsing one a lifetime blessing, a sign of extraordinary fortune. The Sherpa guides Marcus had worked with on his expeditions called them mountain ghosts, and spoke of them with a reverence usually reserved for deities. Marcus himself had spent 3 full expeditions trying to photograph them in the wild, enduring frostbite, altitude sickness, and weeks of futile waiting, managing only distant, grainy shots that hardly did justice to their majesty. And now, here was a mother with cubs within touching distance, though touching was the last thing he planned to attempt. As a wildlife photographer with over 30 years of experience, Marcus knew the protocol. Non-interference was the golden rule. Nature should be observed, documented, but never manipulated. He had built his reputation on capturing authentic moments, refusing to stage interactions or bait animals for better shots, as some of his less scrupulous colleagues did. And yet, this situation had manipulated itself. The storm had driven this family into human territory, and now decisions had to be made that no photography ethics guidebook had prepared him for. The mother leopard was thin, too thin. Marcus could see her ribs beneath her magnificent coat, a sign she'd been struggling to hunt successfully while caring for her young. The muscle definition that should have rippled beneath that spotted pelt was less pronounced than it should be, particularly around her shoulders and haunches. The cubs, though active when nursing, seemed smaller than they should be at their apparent age, their bellies not quite as round as healthy cubs should display. "You're in trouble, aren't you, girl?" he murmured. And the leopard's ears twitched at his voice, rotating like small radar dishes to track the sound. Her tail, thick and expressive, twitched slightly against the straw-covered floor of the barn. Marcus slowly stood, his joints protesting after the long night with audible pops and creaks. The leopard tensed immediately, a low warning growl emanating from her throat. Her pupils dilated and her body shifted subtly, muscles coiling beneath her fur in preparation for whatever might come. He raised his hands in a placating gesture. Ridiculous, he knew, to use human body language with a wild animal, but instinctive nonetheless. "I'm just going back to the cabin," he said softly. "I'll return. I promise." The walk back to his cabin felt surreal, the morning sunlight creating diamonds of the raindrops, still clinging to every surface. The Himalayan landscape, so threatening during the storm, had transformed into a glistening wonderland. The distant peaks, now visible against a clearing sky, wore fresh mantles of snow that blazed white against the blue. Birds had emerged, filling the air with song as if the past 3 days of tempestuous weather had never happened. A pair of Himalayan monals, their iridescent plumage catching the light like living jewels, pecked at insects in the sodden grass near his woodpile. The normalcy of it all stood in stark contrast to the extraordinary situation in his barn. Inside his cabin, Marcus moved with purpose, ignoring the fatigue that pulled at his limbs. First, he called the local conservation authority using his satellite phone, which had finally reconnected. The conversation was brief and unsatisfying. They were understaffed, dealing with storm damage throughout the region, and couldn't dispatch anyone for at least 3 days. Landslides had blocked the mountain roads, a bridge had washed out, and wildlife concerns were being triaged according to human safety priorities. "A snow leopard with cubs, are you certain?" The disbelief in the official's voice was evident even through the patchy connection. "I'm looking at photographs I took last night," Marcus replied, scrolling through the digital display on his camera. "I can email them to you if you don't believe me." "No need. came the hasty response. Just keep your distance. These animals are critically endangered and protected under international law. Any interference, I know the laws. Marcus interrupted, a edge creeping into his voice. I've been photographing wildlife for longer than you've been alive, judging by your voice. What I need is practical advice. The mother is undernourished, and one of the cubs seems weak. Their advice was to keep his distance and let the animals leave on their own. Document but don't interfere. Nature would take its course. And if they don't leave? Marcus had asked. They will, came the confident reply. Wild animals don't stay near humans unless they're desperate. The word desperate echoed in Marcus's mind as he gathered supplies. A large cooler filled with meat from his freezer, venison and goat he'd purchased from local hunters, several bowls, a 5-gallon water container, and his most powerful telephoto lens. He also grabbed his medical kit. Not that he had any veterinary training, but basic first aid was better than nothing if the situation with the weakening cub deteriorated. As he worked, Marcus's mind drifted to the contradictions of his life. He had come to the Himalayas seeking solitude after his divorce, after the magazine he'd worked for had downsized its staff photographers in favor of cheaper freelancers, after his daughter had moved to Australia with her new husband. He had deliberately chosen isolation, yet had always maintained his connection to the world through his images, a witness, not a participant. Now, fate or chance or whatever governed such things had thrust him into direct participation with one of nature's most elusive creatures. By mid-morning, he had established what could only be described as a bizarre routine. Every few hours, he would approach the barn slowly, announcing his presence with soft words, and leave fresh water and meat just inside the door, before retreating. The first time, the leopard had growled continuously, her body tense with warning. By the third approach, she merely watched, still alert but seemingly understanding the pattern of his behavior. From the relative safety of his cabin porch, he would then photograph the leopard as she cautiously approached the offerings, always keeping herself between the food and her cubs. Through his telephoto lens, he captured her delicate approach, the precise way she sniffed the meat before consuming it with efficient bites, the careful manner in which she would carry portions back to her corner where the cubs, still too young for solid food, would paw at it curiously before she pulled it away. The images he captured were extraordinary. Intimate portraits of one of nature's most secretive predators, showing maternal behavior rarely documented. The morning light caught the frost in her whiskers. The afternoon sun highlighted the complex patterns of her coat. And in the golden hour before sunset, her eyes became molten amber as she surveyed her temporary domain. Between these observation sessions, Marcus researched frantically, pulling up every scientific paper and wildlife management protocol he could access with his limited connection. He learned that snow leopard cubs typically remain with their mother for up to 2 years, learning the complex hunting skills necessary for survival in the harsh mountain environment. He discovered that the cats were solitary, except during breeding season, and when raising young, that they typically avoided human settlements completely, and that they preferred rocky terrain where their coloration provided perfect camouflage. None of this explained why this mother had chosen his barn or what he should do about it. By evening, he had reached several uncomfortable conclusions. The mother was likely a young, inexperienced hunter struggling with her first litter. The storm had probably destroyed whatever kill she had stashed nearby, forcing her to seek shelter where she could find it. And most concerning, one of the cubs, the smallest, with a distinctive black smudge on its right ear, seemed to be weakening, its movements increasingly lethargic compared to its siblings. while the other two wrestled and pawed at each other in brief bursts of energy. This one remained curled against its mother, barely responding even during feeding times. Marcus sat at his small desk, journal open before him, making detailed notes of his observations. His scientific training urged objectivity, but he found himself using increasingly personal language as the day progressed. 09:30 hours. Smallest cub, designated Smudge, appears lethargic. Minimal movement during feeding. Mother frequently grooms this cub more than others. 12:45 hours. Mother consumed approximately 2 lbs of venison. Carried portion back to cubs. Attempted to rouse Smudge to interact with meat. Cub showed minimal interest. 1600 hours. Concerning development. Smudge now separated slightly from litter. Mother frequently returning to check on this cub while allowing others more independence. As night fell again, Marcus found himself once more sitting on his porch, camera in hand, watching the barn where golden eyes occasionally reflected the beam of the spotlight he'd set up. The ethical dilemmas swirled in his mind. Was feeding the Leopard family helping or hurting their long-term survival? Should he attempt to contact wildlife veterinarians about the weakening cub, knowing that human intervention could create dependency or stress that might do more harm than good? Would his presence and intervention ultimately condemn these wild creatures to a future where they associated humans with food? A potentially deadly lesson in a region where poaching still occurred despite stringent protections? He had no answers. Only questions that grew more complex with each passing hour. His satellite phone lay on the small table beside him, the number for a wildlife veterinarian in Kathmandu, one he had befriended years ago while documenting a successful breeding program for red pandas. Already entered, but not yet dialed. Calling would mean escalating this from personal observation to official intervention, with all the bureaucracy and potential for mishandling that might entail. The temperature dropped as full darkness descended, the clear post-storm sky offering no insulation against the mountain cold. Marcus pulled his jacket tighter, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The stars emerged one by one, then in constellations, finally in multitudes that city dwellers never experience. A dazzling celestial display that usually filled Marcus with wonder. Tonight, however, his gaze remained fixed on the dark shape of the barn. One thing had become abundantly clear to Marcus as he sat beneath the star-filled Himalayan sky. Whatever had drawn this mother to his barn wasn't random chance. Something had led her here, to him specifically. A man who had spent his life observing but never interfering, documenting but never participating. A man who had chosen isolation, but who now found himself unexpectedly, irrevocably connected to another being's struggle for survival. The universe, it seemed, had a peculiar sense of timing. Just when he had convinced himself that witnessing was enough, that his photographs were his contribution to the world, life had literally arrived at his doorstep, demanding more. As if sensing his thoughts, the mother leopard appeared in the barn doorway, her spotted coat silver in the moonlight. She stood perfectly still, a living sculpture against the darkness, her tail moving in slow, deliberate sweeps. For a brief moment, she stared directly at him across the yard, their eyes meeting in a gaze that transcended species. There was no aggression in her posture, no fear, only a strange, wild awareness that seemed to acknowledge his presence as something more than threat or food source. Then she was gone, slipping back into the shadows of the barn, leaving Marcus with the unshakable feeling that his life's most important work was just beginning. He picked up the satellite phone and began to dial. The satellite phone call to Dr. Pima Sherpa lasted nearly an hour, their conversation punctuated by the frustrating delays and static of the tenuous connection. Marcus had met the veterinarian 5 years earlier during his documentation of Himalayan wildlife conservation efforts, a project that had taken him through remote villages and research stations scattered across Nepal and northern India. They had spent 3 weeks together, tracking red panda populations, and Marcus had been impressed by her combination of scientific rigor and compassionate approach to wildlife medicine. They had maintained a sporadic professional friendship since then, occasionally exchanging emails about conservation developments or unusual wildlife sightings. "A snow leopard with cubs in your barn," Dr. Sherpa repeated, her voice betraying a mixture of excitement and concern. The connection crackled, momentarily obscuring her words before clearing again. "This is unprecedented, Marcus. These animals typically avoid human structures completely. In 15 years of field research, I've never documented or even heard reliable accounts of such behavior." "I know," Marcus replied, watching the barn through his night vision binoculars. The green-tinted image showed the mother leopard pacing near the entrance, her movements fluid despite her undernourished condition. "That's what worries me. Something's wrong beyond just seeking shelter from the storm. The storm passed 2 days ago, yet she's still here." Dr. Sherpa's expertise confirmed his fears. The behavior was highly unusual, suggesting extreme circumstances had driven the mother to override her natural caution. Snow leopards were among the most elusive large predators on Earth, having evolved to avoid confrontation and detection rather than dominate through aggression. Their natural response to human proximity was immediate retreat. For this mother to not only enter, but remain in a human structure indicated either severe desperation or some previous habituation to human presence. Both concerning possibilities. The weakening cub, which Marcus had continued to call Smudge in his notes, was of particular concern. Dr. Sherpa questioned him extensively about the cub's symptoms, asking him to describe everything from respiration patterns to pupil dilation, from gait abnormalities to feeding behaviors. "Without seeing the cub, I can't diagnose," she explained after Marcus had exhausted his observations. "Could be malnutrition, parasites, congenital defect, infection. Impossible to say with certainty. But if it's not nursing properly and showing lethargy, particularly compared to its siblings, the prognosis isn't good without intervention." Marcus watched as the mother leopard returned to her corner, settling beside her cubs with a grace that belied her predatory nature. Through the binoculars, he could see Smudge nestled against her, noticeably less active than the other 2 cubs who pawed and nuzzled at their mother seeking attention or nourishment. "And intervention means capture, doesn't it?" Marcus asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it confirmed. The thought of disrupting this family, of potentially causing more harm through their efforts to help, weighed heavily on him. "Yes," Dr. Sherpa's voice was gentle but firm. "For proper examination and treatment, we would need to temporarily separate the cub from the mother. It's extremely risky, both physically and psychologically. Snow leopard cubs this young are entirely dependent on maternal care, and separations can cause significant stress. And the mother..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Well, you've seen how protective she is. Maternal aggression could pose serious dangers to anyone attempting to handle the cub." Marcus lowered the binoculars, rubbing his eyes which were tired from constant observation and poor sleep. The ethical dilemma was becoming increasingly complex. Do nothing, and Smudge would likely die. Intervene, and they risked traumatizing the entire family, potentially compromising the other cub's welfare in the process. "What about darting the mother?" he asked. "Temporary sedation while we examine the cub?" "Possible," Dr. Sherpa conceded. but with significant risks. Anesthesia in wild felids is never routine, especially with an animal whose baseline health status is already compromised. And there's the stress factor, when she wakes to find her cub missing or human scent on it. Snow leopards have been known to abandon or even kill cubs they perceive as contaminated by human handling. The conversation continued, exploring and discarding various options. Remote monitoring wouldn't provide the detailed health information needed for effective treatment. Attempting to treat the cub in situ while the mother was present was too dangerous. Capturing the entire family would cause maximum stress and require facilities they didn't have immediate access to. Finally, they settled on a tentative plan. Dr. Sherpa would attempt to arrange helicopter transport, the only viable option given the storm-damaged roads. But it would take at least 2 days to organize the necessary permissions, equipment, and personnel. In the meantime, Marcus would continue providing food and water while documenting the family's behavior, particularly any changes in Smudge's condition. "Document everything, Marcus," Dr. Sherpa had emphasized before disconnecting. "Your observations could be invaluable to our understanding of maternal behavior in crisis situations. Snow leopard maternal care has been documented less than a dozen times in scientific literature. Everything you're seeing is potentially new data." "I'll keep detailed records," Marcus promised. But Pema, he rarely used her first name, a sign of his concern. "How long does the cub have if its condition is deteriorating?" Her silence answered before her words did. "If it's what I suspect, a combination of congenital weakness and insufficient nutrition, days at most. That's why I'm pushing for the fastest possible intervention. But Marcus, prepare yourself. Wildlife medicine isn't like treating domestic animals. The survival rates, especially for compromised wild-born cubs." "I understand," he said, though the acceptance felt hollow. Despite decades documenting the harsh realities of nature, Marcus found himself unexpectedly invested in this particular cub's survival. Perhaps it was the intimacy of the situation. These weren't distant subjects viewed through a telephoto lens, but living creatures who had, through circumstance or choice, entered his world and now depended on his decisions. After ending the call, Marcus made a final check on the barn before retiring for what remained of the night. The temperature had dropped considerably, the clear post-storm sky offering no insulation against the mountain cold. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air as he stood silently, listening. No cries emerged from the barn, only the occasional soft shuffling that indicated movement within. Dawn of the 5th day arrived with a crystalline clarity that made the distant mountains seem close enough to touch. The sky was a perfect azure, unmarred by clouds, and the storm-washed landscape gleamed with renewed vibrancy. Marcus had slept fitfully, his dreams filled with images of golden eyes and plaintive cries. He had woken several times, certain he'd heard the cubs crying, only to find silence when he listened at his window. He awoke fully just as first light touched the eastern peaks, automatically reaching for his camera before his feet even touched the floor. A photographer's instinct developed over decades. As he moved to the window, mug of hastily prepared coffee in hand, he nearly dropped both camera and mug at the sight that greeted him. The mother leopard was sunning herself just outside the barn door, her sleek body stretched along a patch of ground where the morning sun had begun to warm the earth. More surprisingly, her cubs, including Smudge, were tentatively exploring the immediate surroundings under her watchful gaze. It was the first time he had seen all 3 cubs outside the barn since their arrival. Marcus froze in his doorway, camera automatically rising to capture this unexpected development. Through his lens, He could see that while the two stronger cubs tumbled and pawed at each other, engaging in the play that would eventually develop into hunting skills, Smudge remained close to the mother, movements hesitant and uncoordinated. The contrast was stark. Where Bold and Curious, as he'd named the other cubs, showed the boundless energy typical of young predators, Smudge's efforts seemed to require concentration, each movement deliberate rather than instinctual. Still, the fact that all three were outside was encouraging, suggesting the weakest cub retained enough strength to follow its siblings. For nearly 20 minutes, Marcus documented their behavior, his experienced eye noting details that would fascinate wildlife biologists. How the mother used her tail to guide the cubs back when they strayed too far, the specific vocalizations she employed, different from any he had heard recorded before. And the way she positioned herself to always maintain sight lines to both her young and the potential threat that Marcus represented. There was intelligence in her positioning, a strategic awareness that spoke to the cognitive sophistication of these animals. The mother occasionally groomed the cubs, her rough tongue serving both to clean them and to stimulate circulation and digestion. Marcus noted that she spent significantly more time grooming Smudge than the others, as if instinctively providing additional care to the weakest offspring. Nature was often portrayed as ruthlessly efficient, with compromised offspring abandoned to preserve resources for healthier siblings. Yet here was evidence of a more complex maternal response. Investment of extra energy in the struggling cub rather than abandonment. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the Leopard family retreated back into the barn as a shadow passed overhead. Marcus looked up to see a lammergeier, the massive vulture-like bird that ruled these skies, circling above. Though not a direct threat to healthy snow leopard cubs, its presence clearly triggered the mother's protective instincts. The speed with which she gathered her cubs and ushered them to safety was remarkable, a fluid choreography of protection that had evolved over millennia. The rest of the morning passed uneventfully. Marcus used the time to organize his notes and photographs, creating a comprehensive record that would assist Dr. Sherpa upon her arrival. He also prepared the barn as much as possible for the coming intervention, clearing paths for easy access and setting up additional lighting that could be activated if needed. By mid-afternoon, Marcus had established a new routine. The Leopard family seemed to have claimed the barn as temporary territory, with the mother making brief forays outside, presumably to scent mark the perimeter. These territorial behaviors suggested she was planning a longer stay than Marcus had initially anticipated, raising new concerns about eventual relocation and the potential for human-wildlife conflict if other residents of the area discovered her presence. Marcus continued providing food, now supplemented with calcium and vitamin supplements Dr. Sherpa had advised might help Smudge, while maintaining a respectful distance. The mother had grown sufficiently accustomed to his approaches that she no longer retreated to the far corner of the barn when he appeared. Though she remained vigilant, her golden eyes tracking his every movement. He had converted his small dining table into an impromptu research station, his laptop displaying the hundreds of photographs he'd taken, organized chronologically to track subtle changes in behavior and physical condition. Beside it lay his journal, filled with increasingly detailed observations. 14 to 20 hours. Mother allowed stronger cubs, designated Bold and Curious based on behavior patterns, to explore up to 5 meters from barn entrance while she remained with Smudge. First observed instance of family separation, suggesting increasing comfort with surroundings despite vulnerability. Bold attempted to stalk a butterfly, showing early predatory behavior. Curious, more interested in tactile exploration, pawing at different textures on barn floor. 14:55 hours. Significant development. Mother brought Smudge outside, placed cub in the patch of sunlight, then proceeded to groom extensively. Possible therapeutic behavior? Smudge showed marginally improved responsiveness during this period, vocalizing with more strength than previously observed. Mother extremely attentive to these vocalizations, responding immediately with physical contact and grooming. 1610 hours. Mother consumed supplemented meat. Behavior change noted, specifically carried portion to Smudge before feeding other cubs or self. Intentional or coincidental? Observed mother regurgitating small amount of meat for Smudge, attempting to introduce solid food despite cub's young age. Possible indication mother senses nutritional deficiency in milk production. Marcus found himself increasingly drawn into the detailed observation of these interactions, his photographer's eye catching nuances that might escape casual observation. The way the mother's pupils dilated when Smudge vocalized compared to her response to the other cubs. The specific pattern of her grooming, more thorough and prolonged with the weakened cub. The positioning of the family during rest periods, with Smudge always placed in the most protected position, often between the mother's forelegs rather than simply against her side like the other cubs. These weren't just animals seeking shelter, he realized. He was witnessing a complex family dynamic, with the mother making continuous adjustments to accommodate the special needs of her compromised offspring while still attending to the development of her healthier cubs. It was a delicate balancing act, one that challenged simplistic notions of nature as coldly selective. As the sun began its descent toward the jagged horizon, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of gold and rose, Marcus received another call from Dr. Sherpa. The connection was clearer this time, suggesting she had moved to a location with better satellite coverage. "The helicopter is arranged for tomorrow morning," she informed him without preamble. "Weather permitting, we should arrive by Aero 900 hours. I'm bringing tranquilizer equipment and a transport crate. Also basic field surgery supplies, oxygen, fluids for rehydration, everything I can reasonably transport." "Just for the sick cub?" Marcus asked, a knot forming in his stomach at the thought of separating the family. The bond he had observed between mother and cubs seemed so integral to their existence that disrupting it, even temporarily, felt like a violation of something sacred. "Ideally, yes," she replied, though her tone suggested she was weighing other considerations. "But we need to be prepared for complications. If the mother becomes aggressive during the extraction attempt?" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. They both understood the potential consequences if things went wrong. A traumatized leopard family, possibly a dead cub, or in the worst case, the necessity of removing the mother as well if she became a danger to the rescue team. The ethical calculations were becoming increasingly complex, balancing immediate welfare against long-term survival, individual needs against species conservation priorities. "I've been thinking," Marcus said, describing the detailed observations he'd made throughout the day. "The mother seems to recognize that Smudge needs special attention. She's adapting her care routines, focusing more energy on the weakened cub. Is it possible that with the supplemented food and her increased care, the cub might recover without our direct intervention?" Dr. Sherpa was silent for a moment, considering. "Possible, but unlikely," she finally responded. "If the underlying issue is something simple like mild malnutrition, perhaps. But if there's infection, congenital defect, or significant parasitic load, all of which could present with the symptoms you're describing, then professional medical intervention represents the cub's only realistic chance of survival." Marcus nodded, though she couldn't see the gesture. The rational part of him knew she was right, that his reluctance to intervene stemmed more from emotional attachment than scientific assessment. Yet something still troubled him about disrupting the family's dynamic just as it seemed to be stabilizing. "There's something else," Dr. Sherpa added after a moment of heavy silence. "The Conservation Authority has been notified about the situation. They're sending a representative with us." Marcus felt a flash of irritation. "I already spoke with them. They weren't exactly helpful." His initial contact with the regional wildlife officials had been frustratingly bureaucratic, more concerned with protocols than practical assistance. "This is different," she explained. "Higher level. The regional director himself is coming. There's significant interest in this case, Marcus. A mother snow leopard seeking human proximity is unprecedented behavior. Some are suggesting she might have had previous human contact." The implication hit Marcus with unexpected force. "You mean she might not be fully wild?" The possibilities were troubling. Snow leopards were occasionally captured by poachers for the illegal exotic pet trade. Cubs that escaped or were abandoned often died, lacking the skills to survive independently. Those that did survive carried the imprint of human contact, complicating their relationship with both their natural environment and human settlements. "It's a possibility we need to consider," Dr. Sherpa conceded. "Her comfort around your structures, her willingness to accept food, these aren't typical behaviors for a completely wild specimen." The regional director mentioned reports from about 2 years ago of a poaching operation that was broken up near the Chinese border. Several adult snow leopards were recovered, but there were indications that cubs had been present and weren't found during the raid. Marcus glanced toward the barn, visible through his window in the fading light. The mother leopard had emerged again and was sitting alertly near the entrance. Her tail curled around her body, its tip twitching occasionally as she surveyed her surroundings. There was nothing in her appearance that suggested captivity. No collar marks, no unusual wear patterns on her coat that might indicate confinement. Yet her behavior did suggest an atypical comfort with human proximity. If she was previously captive, even briefly, Marcus began, thinking through the implications. Would that make her a candidate for relocation to a sanctuary, rather than release back into the wild? "Potentially," Dr. Sherpa acknowledged. "That will be part of tomorrow's assessment. The Conservation Authority will make the final determination based on our observations and medical findings." "But Marcus," her voice softened, "don't get ahead of yourself. One step at a time. First, we need to assess the cub's condition and determine if intervention is viable. Everything else follows from that initial decision point." After ending the call, Marcus returned to his observation post on the porch. The ethical complexities had multiplied exponentially. If the mother had indeed had previous human contact, the entire intervention took on new dimensions. Was he witnessing not just a desperate mother seeking shelter, but an animal caught between worlds, neither fully wild nor domesticated? The implications for the cub's future were significant. They might be imprinting on human structures and presence during a critical developmental period, potentially compromising their ability to function as truly wild animals. As twilight deepened into dusk, Marcus made a decision. He needed closer observation of Smudge to provide Dr. Sherpa with the most accurate information possible before tomorrow's intervention. Setting up his camera with the night vision function activated and attached to a remote trigger, he prepared to enter the barn one more time. The approach was methodical, each step measured and announced with soft words. "Easy, girl. Just checking on your little one. Not going to hurt anyone." He had been speaking to the leopard family consistently during his approaches, believing that the sound of his voice, kept low and gentle, might help establish him as a non-threatening presence. Whether this anthropomorphic gesture had any effect was debatable. but it helped calm his own nerves during these close encounters. The mother's growl was immediate, but not aggressive, more warning than threat. In the dim light, Marcus could see her positioned at the back of the barn, cubs gathered behind her. Her posture was alert, but not the tensed crouch that would precede an attack. Her tail moved slowly from side to side, not the agitated lashing that indicated imminent aggression, but a measured movement that suggested watchfulness. He moved with deliberate slowness, placing a fresh bowl of water and meat supplemented with the nutrients Dr. Sherpa had recommended just inside the door. The routine was familiar now to both human and leopard, a ritual that had developed its own rhythm over the past days. Marcus noted that the mother's ears, while still focused in his direction, no longer flattened against her head when he appeared, another subtle sign of increasing tolerance. Then, instead of retreating as he had done previously, Marcus settled onto his haunches just inside the entrance, maintaining eye contact with the mother while keeping his posture non-threatening. For long minutes, they remained in this silent standoff. The only sounds the occasional shuffling of the cubs and the distant cry of a nightjar beginning its evening hunt. The barn smelled of hay and earth, with the musky undertone of predator now layered through it. Dust motes danced in the last rays of sunlight that penetrated the cracks between the weathered boards. Time seemed suspended in this moment of cross-species observation, with neither human nor leopard certain of the other's intentions, but both maintaining a wary coexistence. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the tension eased. The mother's growl subsided, though her gaze remained fixed on Marcus. One of the stronger cubs, bold, he presumed from the markings, peeked around her flank, curiosity momentarily overcoming caution. The cub's blue-gray eyes, not yet shifted to the golden hue of adulthood, regarded Marcus with unabashed interest. "That's right," Marcus murmured. "Just a strange-looking, harmless primate. Nothing to worry about." He remained perfectly still, allowing the curious cub to observe him without feeling threatened by movement. As if understanding his words, the mother leopard slowly settled into a sphinx-like position, still alert but no longer projecting imminent threat. It was a fragile truce, built on nothing more substantial than mutual tolerance. But it allowed Marcus to activate the remote camera, capturing close-range images of all three cubs as they eventually emerged from behind their mother to investigate the food. Bold led the exploration, approaching the meat with the confident stride that had earned its nickname. Curious followed, more interested in investigating the new textures and smells than in the food itself. Smudge remained behind initially, then made a halting approach, encouraged by soft vocalizations from the mother that sounded to Marcus's ears like gentle urging. The photographs would later reveal what Marcus observed with growing concern. Smudge's condition had deteriorated further. The cub's movements were increasingly uncoordinated, its eyes dull compared to its siblings, its breathing slightly labored. The once plush fur appeared duller than its siblings, lacking the healthy luster that indicated optimal nutrition. Whatever was affecting the young leopard was progressing despite the supplemented diet. Most concerning was the cub's apparent difficulty maintaining balance, a neurological symptom that suggested the problem might be more complex than simple malnutrition. Several times, Smudge attempted to walk toward the food, only to list to one side, requiring correction that seemed increasingly difficult to execute. The mother noticed these struggles, moving closer to provide physical support with her body, nudging the cub gently back into balance with her muzzle. The interaction was heartbreaking in its tenderness. A wild predator, evolved for solitary hunting in one of Earth's most unforgiving environments, showing a depth of maternal care that transcended mere biological imperative. There was awareness in her actions, a responsiveness to her offspring's specific needs that spoke to cognitive and emotional capacities rarely acknowledged in non-human species. Marcus remained in the barn until full darkness fell, his presence seemingly accepted as long as he maintained his position near the door. The Leopard family settled into what appeared to be their evening routine, the mother grooming each cub in turn, with particular attention to Smudge before allowing them to nurse. Bold and curious, fed vigorously, kneading at their mother's belly with tiny paws, while Smudge nursed with less enthusiasm, requiring occasional encouragement from the mother in the form of gentle nudges and licks. When he finally retreated to his cabin, the images from his remote camera confirmed his observations. Smudge needed medical intervention, and soon. The progression of symptoms suggested a condition that was worsening despite improved nutrition and maternal care. Without professional assessment and treatment, the cub's prognosis was poor. That night, as a three-quarter moon cast silver light across the mountain landscape, Marcus sat at his table, reviewing the day's notes and preparing for tomorrow's intervention. The plan seemed straightforward enough. Dr. Sherpa would tranquilize the mother if necessary, extract Smudge for examination and treatment, then return the cub if its condition permitted. The Conservation Authority representative would assess the situation and make recommendations regarding longer-term management of the Leopard family. Yet nothing about this situation had been straightforward from the beginning. The mother's atypical behavior, the cub's mysterious illness, the unexpected bond that had formed between human observer and wild subjects, all combined to create a scenario that defied simple resolution. As Marcus glanced out his window toward the barn, now a silhouette against the star-filled sky, he couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring challenges none of them had anticipated. He thought about his daughter, Lily, now living in Australia with her husband. How would she react to this situation? She had followed him into biology, though she had chosen research over photography, specializing in animal cognition. She would have insights into the mother leopard's behavior that might help navigate tomorrow's intervention. He made a mental note to call her after things were resolved, to share this extraordinary experience with the one person who might fully appreciate both its scientific significance and emotional impact. In the distance, a wolf howled, a long, mournful call that echoed off the mountain slopes. Another answered, then another, the pack communicating across the vastness in ways humans could observe but never fully comprehend. Marcus listened, recognizing in their calls the same fundamental imperative that drove the mother leopard. Survival. Not just of self, but of lineage, of species, of the intricate web that connected all living things. The mountains themselves seemed alive tonight, the moonlight creating a landscape of silver and shadow that emphasized both the beauty and indifference of nature. This was a world where life and death played out according to ancient rhythms, where human intervention was a recent and often disruptive innovation. Yet here he was, preparing to intervene, to impose human solutions on wild problems, driven by a compassion that was simultaneously his species' greatest strength and most dangerous weakness. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For tonight, an uneasy peace held between man and leopard, a temporary alliance against the greater threats of time and circumstance. Marcus closed his journal, set his alarm for pre-dawn, and prepared for what might be the most consequential day in his decades-long career of wildlife observation. His last thought before sleep claimed him was of Smudge's eyes. How they had momentarily brightened when the mother had groomed the cub, a flicker of vitality that suggested the will to survive remained strong despite physical deterioration. It was that will, that fundamental persistence of life, that they would be fighting for tomorrow. In the barn, unseen by human eyes, the mother leopard curled around her cubs, her body providing warmth against the mountain night, her presence offering protection against dangers both known and unknown. Smudge nestled against her belly, drawing what strength remained from this most ancient and powerful of bonds. The mother's steady heartbeat, audible to her cubs' sensitive ears, provided the rhythm that had accompanied their existence since before birth. A constant reassurance in a world of uncertainty. The night deepened, stars wheeled overhead, and the great mountains stood sentinel as they had for millennia, indifferent to the small drama of survival unfolding in their shadow. Yet within that drama lay something profound, a testament to the tenacity of life, the power of maternal devotion, and the unexpected connections that could form between species when circumstance brought them together in moments of vulnerability and need. The helicopter's approach shattered the morning stillness, its mechanical thunder echoing off the mountainsides. Marcus had been awake since dawn, observing the leopard family's morning routine. As the aircraft appeared, the mother leopard immediately herded her cubs deep into the barn's shadows. The aircraft settled onto the uneven ground, and three figures emerged. Dr. Pima Sherpa, a tall man in an official conservation uniform, and a younger assistant carrying equipment. "Marcus," Dr. Sherpa called. "How is our patient this morning?" "No improvement," Marcus replied. "If anything, Smudge seems weaker." The conservation official stepped forward. "Rajiv Acharya, Regional Director for Protected Species Management. I understand you've been harboring a snow leopard family without proper authorization." Marcus kept his response measured. "I've been providing emergency assistance to endangered animals in distress and documenting everything according to scientific protocols." Inside the cabin, Marcus displayed his research: photographs, behavioral notes, and feeding records. Dr. Sherpa examined everything with professional interest, while her assistant unpacked medical equipment. Director Acharya's initial bureaucratic stiffness gradually gave way to scientific curiosity. "These behavioral patterns are unprecedented," he admitted. "The level of adaptive care for the compromised offspring contradicts established literature." Dr. Sherpa looked up from her examination of the photographs. "The cub's condition is concerning. The head tilt and uncoordinated gait suggest neurological involvement. We need to move quickly." They formulated a plan. Dr. Sherpa would tranquilize the mother, allowing them to examine and treat Smudge. The other cubs would be temporarily contained, but kept within the barn to minimize stress. At the barn entrance, Marcus called softly, "Easy, girl. We're here to help." A low, warning growl came from the shadows. The mother had positioned herself in the farthest corner, cubs behind her, eyes reflecting the morning light. "She's too far for a clean shot," Dr. Sherpa whispered. "We need her closer." Marcus placed meat just inside the door, then retreated. Minutes passed in tense silence. The mother remained in her defensive position, clearly disturbed by the presence of multiple humans. Suddenly, Smudge emerged from behind its mother, attempting to walk forward with alarmingly uncoordinated movements. The mother made a soft chirping sound, but Smudge continued its halting progress. "The cub is displaying classic signs of ataxia," Dr. Sherpa whispered. "Possibly cerebellar hypoplasia or a parasitic infection." The weakened cub stumbled and emitted a high-pitched cry. The mother rushed forward to retrieve her offspring. Dr. Sherpa raised the dart gun and fired. The mother leopard flinched as the dart struck her shoulder, then whirled toward the perceived attack with a snarl. Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between the leopard and the others. "Easy, girl. were helping Smudge. The mother's charge faltered. She reached Smudge, gently grasped the cub, and attempted to return to the corner. She made it halfway before the tranquilizer took effect. She sank to the ground, still curled protectively around Smudge, her golden eyes fixed on the humans before slowly closing. The next 30 minutes were a blur of activity. The healthy cubs were placed in a transport crate. Smudge was transferred to the examination table, where Dr. Sherpa performed a thorough assessment. "I've found the likely cause," Dr. Sherpa announced after examining a blood smear. "Toxoplasmosis. It's treatable, but the neurological damage may be permanent, and treatment will require multiple doses over several weeks. Given the endangered status and the cub's condition," Acharya explained, "standard procedure would be to remove it for treatment at our facility. The mother and healthy cubs would be relocated to a suitable wilderness area." "Separating them permanently?" Marcus couldn't hide his dismay. The assistant called urgently. "Her respiration rate is increasing. She's coming out of sedation earlier than expected." Marcus made a decision that would alter the course of not only the Leopard family's future, but his own. "I'll take responsibility for them, all of them." "That's completely outside protocol," Acharya objected. "Not as pets," Marcus clarified. "As a rehabilitation case. My property borders protected forest land. I have the resources and now the medical knowledge to continue treatment." "I'll need daily reports," Acharya said finally, "and weekly visits from our field team. At the first sign that the situation is becoming unmanageable, all 3 cubs and the mother will be relocated to our facility." "Agreed," Marcus said immediately. They quickly returned the environment to normal before the mother regained consciousness. As they watched from outside, the mother leopard slowly awoke. Her first action was to check each cub, spending extra time grooming Smudge. "She knows something's different," Marcus observed. "She can probably smell the medications and our handling." "Yet she's not rejecting the cub," Dr. Sherpa noted. "That contradicts conventional understanding of how wild felids respond to human scent." "Because she's not entirely wild," Director Acharya said quietly. "A truly wild snow leopard would likely abandon a cub that had been handled so extensively by humans." That evening, as darkness settled over the landscape, Marcus felt more purpose than he had in years. Inside the barn, the mother leopard curled around her cubs. Smudge nestled against her belly, already seeming slightly more responsive following treatment. Marcus raised his camera, capturing this moment of tranquil unity. The image would later become famous, the first in a series documenting the Kingsley Rehabilitation, a groundbreaking approach to wildlife conservation. As he lowered the camera, the mother leopard opened her eyes, meeting his gaze across the distance. In that moment, Marcus felt the first stirrings of a bond that transcended conventional understanding. A recognition of shared purpose that would guide the extraordinary journey ahead.